Hey everyone, this is Thomas from Springfield Daily. We are in the studio in the Innovate Springfield Incubator in downtown Springfield. My guest today is Dr. David Gill, one of the Democratic candidates in our local 13th Congressional District. Thank you so much for being here. So please tell us a little bit about yourself and why are you running for Congress?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me here, Thomas. I'm a emergency medicine physician. I live in Bloomington with my wife Elaine. We have 3 sons and 3 daughters and 2 cats and a pair of rescue dogs, a couple turtles. And I'm running primarily because of the terrible injustices that I see in the emergency department on a daily basis. You know, the suffering and the occasional dying that I see here in America that is determined by what type of insurance people have, it galls me. And so it really motivates me to run and try to bring to America the single payer healthcare system that we've needed for a long, long time.
All right, well, again, as always, I want to open up the floor, and I assume that's your number one issue?
Sure, yeah, healthcare drives me. I have a number of interests. I think that probably the most important issue of all is climate change, because when we fail with regards to climate change, which we are doing, and unfortunately we're on a downward spiral with regards to climate change, approaching a period of irreversibility. And if and when we fail with that, then in another century or 2 or 3, there really won't be human civilization around to argue about the many other issues that there are to argue about today, like immigration and healthcare and women's rights and taxes and foreign policy. All of that will go by the wayside when we go by the wayside because of a planet that is no longer hospitable for hosting us.
All right, well, you've answered the first 2 parts of my question on climate change, which is it real? What's the threat? And so I guess, what do we do about it?
It's very real. It's been known to be real for a good 30 years. Scientists understand what's going on. It's real. It's caused by man's activities. It's caused by our burning of fossil fuels. And it is, as I indicated, the issue of top importance. You know, healthcare is a passion of mine, but even that has to rank far below climate change. And what we do about it is stop investing ourselves in the fossil fuel industry as we have done for the last many decades or century or 2, and move forward with the green revolution that we've needed for a long, long time. There is more than sufficient solar energy available to us, and wind energy and geothermal. Everything that we need is there. We just need to move forward. And when we go forward with the revolution that's needed with respect to saving this planet for ourselves, not only are we doing good for ourselves and for the generations to come, but we're doing good for the economy, because there are tens of thousands of jobs to be had in moving forward and setting up the variety of solar farms, solar panels on every roof in America, wind farms, and geothermal installations. There's just a boatload of work to be done with regards to that. A lot of people to be put to work, a lot of money to be made by entrepreneurs who are ahead of the curve and thinking creatively with regards to this.
All right, well, you mentioned quite a portfolio of green energy: wind, solar, geothermal. For people who are unfamiliar, what's geothermal?
Geothermal is digging down into the ground a lengthy distance where the environment is relatively warm in times when it's cold outside in the winter, or where the environment is relatively cool in times when it's warm up at surface regions, like in summertime. And you can take advantage of that. Many homes now have installed geothermal power systems to help so that people don't have to burn as many fossil fuels to keep their home warm in the winter or cool in the summer.
All right, and as part of that portfolio, do you believe that nuclear has a place in the green energy portfolio?
You know, I recognize some of the virtues of nuclear, and I recognize that it's not the burning of fossil fuels, that it is not contributing to the climate change that we're talking about, but it has one huge downside that makes it so that we ought not to continue down a nuclear path, and that is the spent fuel rods and what to do with them, because those things remain radioactive over a period of hundreds of thousands of years. And to this date, 40 or 50 years into using nuclear power sources, we still don't have a good answer for how to dispose of those.
All right. And as part of infrastructure development, that's always one of the big popular items. Do you believe that upgrading the energy grid should be considered just as important as upgrading our bridges and roads?
It should. And in fact, we were just talking in Bloomington, where I live recently. There are solar farms that have been proposed and that are likely going to go forward. And then when those are up and running, we have a couple of large wind farms already. We will reach max capacity of our grid. And the grid has needed expanding for decades in this country, and it's also needed hardening. The grid is susceptible to threats posed by people like the dictator of North Korea. With a relatively low-level nuclear weapon that could be exploded by a gentleman like him, he could wreak great damage to the grid and make things hard for people, even short of a true nuclear disaster.
Yes, I mean, the EMP threat I've read is actually greater than a conventional nuclear strike.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about which is greater, but I know that it's significant and it's not being talked about much in the mass media.
No, well, that's definitely a serious issue. And thinking of networks, the FCC in December voted to repeal the net neutrality regulations. Was that the right move?
No. I've been a supporter of net neutrality for many, many years. And I think that when you're trying to maintain or reestablish a democracy, instead of the plutocracy that sadly America has become, I think that one of the main ways to do that is to take advantage of the opportunity to have people communicating freely with each other, and doing away with net neutrality is a grievous step in the wrong direction with regards to that.
In that same vein, during the Obama administration, the U.S. gave up much of its control of the ICANN domain registry system to nonprofits and to a more global community. Was that the correct move?
Yeah, I believe so. I think that putting profit as the motivating force when it comes to the use of computer networks is a mistake. And I'm a capitalist, but I think that these things should be viewed as utilities. We don't try to make it so that one company can make more money in providing electricity to our homes for the most part. And I think that it should be the same way with regards to computer networks.
All right, and you say you are a capitalist, but on your website you talk about some of the dangers of free trade. Can you explore that issue?
Sure. I think that free trade needs to be engaged in carefully and with certain protective measures. We have seen with NAFTA and similar trade measures designed along the same way as NAFTA that they cost us terribly in terms of jobs primarily. When you don't write into the legislation or the trade agreement the same type of worker protections for those working in other countries as what we have provided to American workers, then these companies naturally, given that they're in business to make money, are going to ship those jobs overseas. And so we've seen the loss of hundreds of thousands of manufacturing jobs and other jobs in this country overseas since NAFTA was passed back in '93.
All right. Obviously, I don't think you're in favor of repealing worker protections in the United States.
No.
So what should the United States do to make itself more competitive?
Well, I think that when we engage in those types of trade agreements, that we should only sign on to them when other countries agree to follow our lead. We've been a leader in the world in many different types of ways over a long period of time, and at least since World War II. And I think that we should stand up and extend throughout the world the types of worker protections that we've had here for American workers to the extent that we can, and we can when we're engaged in negotiations on trade like that.
And Congress recently passed a major tax overhaul, which your opponent, Republican Ronnie Davis, was a proponent of. What do you think about that bill? Was there anything in it that you think was a good move, or were there things that you think were problematic?
I think it was entirely problematic. I think that it was a gift to the millionaires and billionaires and corporations who have not been paying their fair share for many decades in this country, and who will now have even less movement toward paying their fair share. I mean, they did not need a tax cut, the corporations here in America. They've been whining for years about their 35% corporate tax rate, but in point of fact, the real corporate tax rate has been somewhere around 18 or 19% because of the thousands of loopholes that are written into the tax code by corporate-owned congresspeople. And 42% of the corporations have been paying a grand total of zero taxes, while you and I and your mom and dad and working people throughout this country obviously pay far more than zero. So they were handed a great big gift. It drove another big spike into the deficit that most of the people that voted for this bill have been whining about for a long, long time, including Mr. Davis, who I ran against back in 2012 and listened to him carp about our deficit ad nauseum during that campaign in 2012. He just bumped the deficit up by another $1.5 trillion. And I think that it paves the way for what Paul Ryan has been talking about for many years, and that is striking further at the social safety net that has had so many holes put into it already.
Right. Is the deficit, I mean, people talk about the deficit and the debt, and some people are sort of apocalyptic about it, some people are less so. Is the deficit, and I suppose irrespective of the individual yearly deficit, the total debt, is that a problem?
It is ultimately, and Wall Street pays attention to it, and when Wall Street pays attention, then it winds up impacting our lives in terms of inflation and in terms of interest rates. And so the deficit is important. I think that there are steps that can be taken to help lower the deficit. As I indicated, here in America, the 1% have been doing very, very well for the last 40 years. They have not been paying nearly their fair share, and I think that we should be making certain demands upon them. They don't get rich in a vacuum. They get rich on the backs of American workers. The American worker has been more and more productive each and every year for the last 2 generations, but their productivity doesn't go to them, the worker. Instead, we have a trickle-up economy. And so I think that raising tax rates on the richest in this country is appropriate. I also think that there are places in which we can reduce expenses. There's no reason that we need to have a military budget that is bloated to be the sum of the next 8 to 27 countries' military budgets, depending on who's doing the counting. We are funding weapon systems that the military says that they don't even want. A Republican president, Dwight Eisenhower, as he left office, cautioned us against the growing military-industrial complex, and we've really failed to heed his warning.
No, for sure. Before I get into questions about the healthcare system, can I get more about your experience as a doctor? What specifically do you do? And
Sure. I trained in family practice. I went to medical school at the University of Illinois in Urbana, and went to Iowa for my residency training in family practice. I'm board certified in both family practice and emergency medicine. I was in family practice for about 6 or 7 years after residency, full-scale family practice, birth to death, including obstetrics, and shifted over to emergency medicine almost 20 years ago now. And so I continue to work. I think it's important that I work. Working in the emergency department allows me to be in contact with people from all walks of life, and I think it's good to understand the perspectives of everybody, regardless of their age or race or religion or gender or sexual orientation. The emergency department is a great melting pot, and so I still work part-time. I cut back substantially for this. It's a very competitive primary campaign, and I don't know how much detail you want with regards to what goes on in an emergency department, but we see everything from hangnails to life-threatening situations.
What you said obstetrics?
Yes, I used to do a lot of OB.
What is that?
Management of pregnancies,
right.
Labor and delivery. Used to deliver about 50 babies a year.
Oh, all right. And what sort of, you talked about, you saw some really sort of, I think you said tragic stuff in terms of access to care. What do you mean by that?
Oh, I probably have hundreds of stories. The most recent one was a few weeks ago down in the southern part of the state. I had a 60-year-old guy who works very hard. He has health insurance, but like so many Americans, it's not good health insurance. And like so many Americans, he works hard, but he's not rewarded in the way that he ought to be. He lives paycheck to paycheck, and his insurance requires a $500 copay if he should go to the emergency department. And he's generally pretty healthy, so he gets by. More than 40% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. They have less than $400 to their name. And this gentleman is within that group, and he developed abdominal pain one day. It was excruciating. He contacted his primary care doctor, who told him you need to go to the emergency department and probably have a CAT scan of your belly and evaluate that further. But because of the $500 copay, which is a huge amount of money to this hardworking guy, he stayed home for an extra 16 to 18 hours. And by the time he came to my emergency department, his appendix had burst, and he was life-threateningly ill with bacterial sepsis, bacteria in his bloodstream, because of the rupturing of his appendix. And a guy like that would not have to be in that type of situation if he was in any other developed country in the world. Only here in America did he have to be in such a situation where his life was on the line.
Right. Well, obviously Obamacare passed during the Obama administration, and there were some complaints about that system, and so the Republicans have pushed for both repeal and replace, and what some are calling Trump Care or Ryan Care.
Right.
What's your perspective on those moves?
Well, I think it's terrible. Mr. Davis voted for a health care bill that would strip insurance from tens of millions of Americans, including a lot of people that live here in Illinois 13. It would raise costs for everybody. It's another move designed to bow down before the for-profit private health insurance industry. And I've been arguing for 25 years. 25 years ago, I joined a group called Physicians for a National Health Program. It's a group of 20,000 doctors that advocate for a single-payer healthcare system and improved Medicare for all type system that would remove the for-profit private health insurance industry from the equation. Uncle Sam runs Medicare very efficiently. The overhead with Medicare is 2 to 4%, whereas private health insurance, it's upwards of 20 to 40%. And I frequently talk about what private health insurance is. I have a poster child for that, a man named William McGuire, who retired as the CEO of United Healthcare, one of the 5 big health insurance companies here in America, several years ago. And when he retired, he received a $1.6 billion with a B dollar bonus from United Healthcare as a parting gift, as it were. And when you do the arithmetic, this guy, he received enough money to spend $100,000 a day on himself every day for 42 years. And their greed really knows no bounds. I don't know what you would do with $100,000 a day, each and every day for 42 years. And that is money that people were sending in for co-pays and deductibles and premiums. And that's what our healthcare system is. We have the 60-year-old guy needlessly fighting for his life because of a ruptured appendix, and on the other side of the coin, we have a man with $100,000 every day for 42 years. And so I really think that we need an improved Medicare for all system, and we need it promptly. We need it now. Some of my primary opponents talk about some stepwise measures, and we've waited long enough. This is something that's been talked about for decade after decade. FDR presented single-payer health care as part of his second Bill of Rights. Didn't quite get that done before he got sick and died. Richard Nixon was pushing towards single-payer health care in 1970, and the time has come. 60% of Americans are demanding it, 60% of doctors want it, and unfortunately we have too many members of Congress who are owned by the health insurance industry.
No, we could talk for hours about this.
Sure.
But I have one other proposal that I don't know how long, I don't know anything about. You talk about on your website about making banking services available at the post office. Can you explain that?
Yeah, I think that we need public banks. They're on the verge of having a public bank in Seattle. The guy that just won the governorship of New Jersey is talking about having a state bank. There's a lot of people that don't have ready and easy access to simple banking services, and I think that's something that we can provide at the level of the federal government. And post offices, you already have the infrastructure in place, and there's no reason why you couldn't extend to have post offices evolve into being post offices / banks.
And so I mean, obviously there are money orders there, but I mean, logistically, what would that entail? What would we? I mean, I literally don't know anything about it.
Well, I think that it would be a very simple type of banking without significant fees attached to it. It wouldn't be something designed to make money, just in the way that Uncle Sam manages Medicare and is not in the business to make money, and thus has a natural big advantage over the for-profit private health insurance industry, whose main mission is maximizing their profit, not making people healthy. Uncle Sam, in getting involved in the banking business, wouldn't be in it to make money, and so could have a variety of savings and checking accounts and whatnot available to people at nominal cost.
And do you think that would have a stimulating effect if people could keep? Because I understand people of the lower incomes who live paycheck to paycheck lose a relatively large percentage of their income to fees.
They do.
Do you think that would have a stimulating effect if you could eliminate that?
Sure. I mean, it would be more money in their pocket that they could use to buy the things that they need and to stimulate the economy. While we're talking about people in that type of situation, I don't know your list of questions, but something that I like to emphasize is the minimum wage in this country. Those people are working very hard in this country and not being rewarded for their work. And so I'm a passionate advocate of a $15 an hour minimum wage. I think that had minimum wage kept up with inflation, it would be more than $22 an hour. Had it kept up with CEO pay in this country over the past few decades, it would be more than $30 an hour. So I think that asking for $15 an hour is really very reasonable.
And as part of that, the fight for 15, would you propose steps to help protect tip workers?
Yeah, you're preaching to the choir there, Thomas. I talk about this all the time. Servers their minimum wage is not $7.25 federal or $8.25 Illinois. Their minimum wage, and a lot of people don't know this, is $2.13 an hour. I had a grandmother who served tables for 60 years. She had the varicose veins to prove it. My daughter serves tables at an Olive Garden while attending college, and servers are the most mistreated class of workers, perhaps, within the American economy, because when they're being paid just $2.13 an hour and they're dependent on their tips, they have to acquiesce and give in to certain misbehaviors and harassments on the part of their superiors or customers. And so very much I would include, it's time to stop this divide between the servers and the not servers. Everybody should be getting $15 an hour minimum wage.
And so even though, it's built into the law, but I've heard that not so much. Well, that ideally employers are required to match the 15 or the minimum wage.
Right.
But I understand that does not
in
actually
real life
happen.
No. And in fact, the Trump administration recently passed regulations that give the bosses more access to the servers' tips now than previously.
I see that we're in a very crowded primary. You've got a lot of people running against you. Why you? Why are you the standout candidate?
I think three reasons primarily. One, the issues. I'm a candidate who has passionately argued for single-payer health care for 25 years. I'm running against some people that can't even get to single-payer health care or that have come late to it within the last few weeks, have become advocates for single-payer health care. Two, the $15 an hour minimum wage. Again, several of my opponents never say a word with regards to that. And thirdly, tuition-free access to public higher education and trade schools. There's a lot of people in this country. America is the land with the least social mobility in the world amongst developed countries. If you're born into poverty, you will stay in poverty all your life, on average, more here in America than in any other developed country. And I think that when people are trying to improve their lot in life, we need to reward them with a minimum wage that allows them to keep their head above water, and with tuition-free access to higher education or to trade schools to learn a trade that pays them a good living. So those three issues, I never hear anything about tuition-free access from my primary opponents. So the issues, I think, are one reason that people should support me in the primary. Secondly, my demonstrated ability to win. I ran back in 2012 against Rodney Davis and fell short by 0.3 of 1 point. But in reality, my message delivered by me won by 7 points. It was just the voters' misfortune that year that we had a liberal independent on the ballot. In years that end in a 2, and only in those years, it's relatively easy for an independent to get on the ballot. And we had one, and he was liberal, saying all the same things as me about climate change and campaign finance reform and single payer and a woman's right to choose and gay marriage. You know, it was like I was running against Rodney Davis and this mirror image of myself. So, and even with that, I wound up falling short by just 0.3%. And I've watched since then, the last 2 cycles, where Democrats have lost by 50 to 60 times what I lost by. And, you know, I think it's been made very clear that here in this district, you can't just go out there with a D after your name and succeed. You have to have a certain passion and a certain message and a certain demonstrated integrity to allow you to capture the tens of thousands of votes needed amongst swing voters and thoughtful Republicans in order to succeed. And we won't have, 2018 obviously doesn't end in a 2, and so we won't have some liberal independent to protect Rodney Davis this time around. And so I think without a doubt that I would stand the greatest chance of defeating him next November if I should succeed on March 20th. And finally, I like to say that when I go to Washington, I won't be just another congressman. With my background as a physician and as the former assistant director of the Illinois Department of Public Health, I intend to be a leader in moving us toward that single-payer healthcare system that I've been pushing for so many years.
All right, well, thank you very much. And one final question. What would you say to those moderates and those independents, not members of your base, not card-carrying Democrats or progressives, but to the people who think primaries really aren't for them? Why should they pull that Democrat ballot?
Well, frankly, I need their vote. I need their support in order to succeed. You know, if they are on my side, if they recognize that I'm a man who is doing this simply because I care about their well-being, then they need me to go on beyond March 20th if we're to defeat someone like Rodney Davis, who takes a whole lot of corporate money and seems to be a part of the swamp that President Trump talks about. So I think that President Trump, when he talks about the swamp, he's right. It's just unfortunate that I don't think he really meant to drain it the way that he talked about. And I'm someone that is not a part of that system. As you've seen, I got outraised 5-1 in the 2012 primary and succeeded. I was up against the National Democratic Party leadership. It's the same situation this year. I've been outraised 4.5-1 by a couple of people who get a lot of big checks from Washington attorneys and lobbyists and consultants. And you know, my interest is solely in the ordinary men and women who I know so well from taking care of them in emergency departments throughout this district. I've worked in 5 of the 14 counties in this district. And so so moderates and independents, come on over and support someone who understands what your life is and who wants to improve your life.
All right, well, thank you very much for being here. My guest today, again, was Dr. David Gill, one of the candidates in the 13th Congressional District. And when's that primary?
March 20th, 34 days from today.
And the Olympics just started. What's your event?
Oh, gosh. I guess I like ice hockey a great deal. I'm a hockey nut, and so I'm not sure how the Americans are going to do with the NHL players not there, but I think it's all a lot of fun.
All right, again, well, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Thomas. It was a pleasure.
This has been Thomas for Springfield Daily Radio.